Today, new reporting from the New York Times reveals never-before-seen details about the relationship between President Trump and convicted sex offender Jeffrey Epstein. The deeply sourced story details just how close Epstein and Trump were and what brought them together. It's in direct contrast to a Trump lawyer's claims that the future president and Epstein did not socialize together and were never really friends. Joining me now, the man behind that story, New York Times political and investigative reporter Nicholas Confessore. Nick, I want you to take us inside this reporting. How close were they really?
I think they were as close as any other friends that they had. And I think that Jeffrey Epstein thought he was Donald Trump's closest friend for a period. They spent a lot of time talking on the phone about women and sexual conquests. They spent time at Trump Tower or over at Jeffrey Epstein's offices nearby on Madison Avenue. They flew on each other's planes, and they partied together a lot. At a lot of parties with women, people who are younger than they are. And I think what brought them together was women and sexual conquest.
You actually spoke to a former assistant of Epstein's, and I thought, well, how do we know all of this? Because you get into some pretty specific details. He actually let assistants listen in on the phone calls with Donald Trump?
Yeah, it was a power play. So we spoke to several former assistants and employees of Jeffrey Epstein's, and he had a habit of putting Donald Trump and other famous friends on the phone. It was partly a power play and partly a way that he groomed people. See how powerful I am. I can put this person on the phone. I can get them on the phone. I can put them on speaker. We're friends. That's how powerful I am. It was a way that he groomed people. And he would put Donald Trump on the phone. They would talk about sex.
In response to your question, the White House called it a fake story, which is not worth the paper it's printed on, just another stale regurgitation of decades-old false allegations.
Well, look, based on our interviews and a scouring of court records and other sources, at least 6 people who have accused Maxwell and Epstein of grooming and abuse were at some point introduced to Trump through them. And one of them was a minor. And you can read her story in public court records. She said that she was bought to Mar-a-Lago by Jeffrey Epstein when she was 14 and introduced and said, "Isn't and Epstein kind of nudged Donald Trump and said, "This is a nice one," right? Something like that. So I don't know. I think the reader has to judge if 2 grown men are staying there with a 14-year-old, right? What message can you take from that? What should the men have assumed was happening? And that's a question for Trump to answer. He didn't want to answer any of our questions specifically. We got one blanket statement for a long list of questions. And we'll see if he ever answers those questions.
Let's go through a few things quick. Besides this, there's 6 women who claim to have been given to Trump from Epstein, one of them being a 14-year-old girl, which are we now surprised what Meg Kelly did when she came out and tried to normalize men being with 15-year-old girls when she was like, it's not like they were 4, it's not like they were 6 or whatever ages she picked. And she was like, they were 15. This is what we were talking about in the previous video. They're literally trying to normalize grown-ass men being with 14 and 15-year-old girls. And it's because Meg Kelly knew this story was out there. So already running defense for Trump. And what people think it's okay for 2 grown-ass men to be hanging out with a 14-year-old girl who has said she was sexually abused. And I know there's going to be a lot of Trump supporters out there trying to burn holes through this and say that it's a hoax and a Democratic conspiracy. But we already know that Trump spent Thanksgiving with Epstein in 2017 while he was president. We already know that Trump sent Epstein a birthday letter in the shape of a woman, and he signed his name as the pubic hair. And he talks about some wild shit in there. You kind of got to read between the lines, but go in there and read it. You can see what he's alluding to when he's writing to Epstein. We already know that Epstein email said, yes, Trump knew about the women. I think the words were absolutely when asked by Maxwell in the email. There is a lot of things we have already learned from these emails that were released from the Epstein estate. We've seen a few of the pictures of the 95,000 that the Epstein estate had released. We do know from a congressman that there is photos of sexual activity, but they are going through trying to protect the victims in this before we get to see any of those.